Well, hello, everybody. Hey, it is a Wednesday, and we are in the book of Judges. I'm just trying to see about where we are as far as our daily reading plan. We are on day 44. Day 44. And so we've made it through the books of Moses, the first five books, and we made it through the book of Joshua. And now we are at the very beginning as far as our time of reading together, like we're doing here on Facebook, of the book of Judges. Now, the book of Judges, as you probably read four chapters yesterday, it's a disturbing book. It really is. It's a book all about defeat. And we see the people of Israel, there's really no central leadership figure, not one person. We've had that before. We had Abraham, of course, and then Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, and then we had, of course, Moses stepped up and led, and then we had Joshua. But when we get to the book of Judges, we see the absence of that central character, that one big leadership role is really empty. And in place of that, we have a series of successive judges. Now, when we think about judges, we probably have an idea of a person in a black robe, sitting behind a huge elevated platform type desk with a gavel in a courtroom in a court of law. That's not the idea here. More likely, the accurate description would be that of a champion, a conqueror for the people, one that would go out and fight the battles and leading the people. And so in that way, hopefully that helps us to resolve this idea of a judge. Champion, I think, is a really good way to put it. And in the book of Judges, we have 13 of these particular people. They rise up. They are oppressed, being put down by their enemies. A judge rises up. The Lord brings up one of these champions, and he rallies the people. Sometimes he just goes out on his own, and he, in effect, defeats the enemies of God, the enemies of Israel's people, and the people are victorious, and they enjoy that victory for a little while, but then they go right back down that spiral into a place of complacency and apathy, and then disobedience to the Lord, and finally end up being oppressed. And so it's just a continual up and down in the book of Judges, and it's really a sad time in their history. One of the key verses I think I mentioned yesterday was that there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes, and certainly that shows. And so we go from a time of conquest up under Joshua down to this up and down time, covering a period of approximately 350 to 400 years, and there is no king in Israel. This is a book that kind of transitions us between the leadership of Joshua into the installation of the very first king, which would be King Saul. After that, King David, and after that, King Solomon. Three great, as far as potential leaders. Saul, of course, turned out not to be a great leader, but he had that potential. And so during this time, it's also helpful to remember that Israel had that special relationship with God where they were a theocracy, meaning that they were a people who had a unique relationship with God, with Yahweh, and was ruled by Yahweh. And they were, God was their king. They were expected to honor him and to love him and to obey him. But of course, we see how the people, of course, could not do that, did not do that. As Joshua had closed in his last dying statements there, you cannot serve the Lord. You cannot obey the Lord. And certainly Joshua must have realized that in their own capacity they were unable to do that. And so the book of Judges shows us that downward spiral that happens whenever they leave serving the Lord and obeying the Lord. And the resulting of that is that the nation enters into a time of being oppressed and manipulated, hurt, entrapped by their enemies. And so God raises up a judge to deliver them, but then they go right back down to that same area. Okay, and so we've got these 13 judges. One of them happens to be a very fierce woman and her name is Deborah, and that's who we have read about in chapter 4. She was a prophetess, and they came to her during a time of oppression, and we remember how she summoned this person named Barak, and Barak, for whatever reason, perhaps out of fear, cowardice, or whatever, when she told him it was his job and he was called to go into battle against Sisera, he said, "I will go if you go with me, but if you don't go, then I won't go." And so, really not a good example whatsoever of the leader that we would kind of like to rally behind. Somebody like that. If you won't go, I'm not going, but if you'll go with me, hold my hand, I'll go with you. And so, of course, Deborah did, and we see how Sisera was defeated, and we also saw how this mysterious person, Jael, put this tent peg through the temple of one of the leaders that were coming against Israel. So it's a very graphic book as well. We're going to see a lot of graphic things take place in this book before we're through. So just kind of fasten your seatbelts, for this. Some people would say it's kind of, PG-13 or maybe even R-rated book in the Bible in the sense of gore and things like that. Well, let's dive into chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. And this is really the song after the victory. Deborah has went with Barak, and in that way they have defeated Sisera and the forces there, and of course done it by the hand of God, not upon their own, but upon God's help. And as customary in those times, there would be a victory song, after the victory has been won, and recounting the things that God had done for them during the battle. So that's what we're reading about. We're reading about the song after the victory. Okay, so verses 1 and 2. Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, "When leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord." And certainly that's true. When we as people, when we are up under leadership, we want those leaders to lead. And how blessed it is when we have good leaders that lead, especially if they lead godly. And so this song speaks about that. Now, we have to again remember what happened whenever she called Barak and he said, "I won't go unless you go." But she went with him, and the song is about this victory. When leaders lead in Israel, bless the Lord. People are blessed when leaders lead. And when people offer themselves under that leadership, when people willingly offer themselves, that's a blessing too. And so that's what this is speaking here about as well. So we come on down to verse 3. Excuse me. And so, "Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. I, even I, will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the Lord God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom," Seir and Edom would be speaking about the same place there. This is the area on the eastern side of the Jordan River. "The earth trembled and the heavens poured," speaking about rain, as he's going to mention here. "The clouds also poured water. The mountains gushed before the Lord, this Sinai before the Lord God of Israel." And this is, of course, remembering that God had sent this great rain that helped the forces of Sisera to be defeated. They had those 900 iron chariots, and they were down in this area, this valley. And so surrounding mountainous area, when the rains came down in that area and down those mountains, it just made that area down in the valley where they were trying to fight the battle almost impossible for those iron chariots to get around. And so they're attributing this work of the rain coming to the Lord. Now, what's also interesting is whenever we really do some in-depth study on this, which we're not trying to do, but just by way of mention, the gods that the Canaanites worshipped, one of them would have been a god that would have protected them from that particular rain onslaught that caused them to lose that battle. So in that way, their false gods abandoned them, causing them to lose the battle. I think that's worth mentioning there. And of course, we know that those gods are not gods at all, but we see them speaking about this thing that the Lord had brought their way for their benefit that caused them to be able to win the battle, this onslaught of rain. All right, now in Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 2, There was also an occasion like that as well back during the time of Exodus that Moses is remembering there in Deuteronomy. Okay, so verses 6, 7, and 8. Now, what they're going to be speaking about here in this song is the times preceding this victory, where they were up under this oppression from the Canaanites. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anath, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted, and the travelers walked along the byways. Village life ceased, it ceased in Israel. Now, what's being spoken about? Israel was so oppressed up under these Canaanite forces, up under Sisera and these others, that the people wouldn't even travel along the main highways. Crime was so bad. We would say even some type of a domestic terrorist activity taking place, that the people wouldn't hardly leave their homes for the fear of the violence and the crime that was taking place there. And they had to travel the back ways because of all of the fears that was associated with going down the main roads, the main highways. So she's saying that no one walked those highways. Those highways were empty. People didn't leave their houses to do anything because of fear. That was the state that they found themselves in when Deborah arose. Now, again, that's a tremendous difference, a contrast, really, between life up under Joshua in the conquering that they were taking, that they took and that they were experiencing up under his hand and had been delivered through the power of God. And so what a tremendous way that they had fallen, and how far they had fallen as well, to this place of being in fear. And then she says this, until I, Deborah, arose. Arose a mother in Israel. They chose new gods. Notice that's a little G there, speaking about the false gods. Then there was war in the gates. Not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. Now, the oppression by the enemies of Israel, these Canaanites. The Canaanites is just a word that covers all these different people groups that was in that area. The Hivites and the Perizzites and all the different ites that was there, Jebusites and so forth. A Canaanite is a grouping that just kind of clumps them all together. They had taken away all of their weapons. And so the Israelites had no way to defend themselves, no way to mount an army, if you will. This is how sad and how far that they had come in this time. Not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. So they'd been de-armed, we might would say. All right, so now verse 9, if you will. My heart is with the rulers of Israel, who offered themselves willingly with the people. And then again, here's this kind of verse, if you will, refrain, bless the Lord. And so not only was she rejoicing in a song about her leadership in a way, and I don't think she's doing that proudly. I think she's just stating the facts, but also the fact that these other leaders rose up as well. My heart is with the rulers of Israel. So in a way, we could say that her vision, Deborah's vision, was not just about being the sole person, but about having strong leaders there to lead the people. And I think that's a tremendous statement there. All right, we come down to verse 10. Speak, you who ride on white donkeys. Now, this would be the leaders. This would have been something that the leaders would do very prevalently, in that time. They'd ride on these white donkeys. Riding that white donkey would be a sign of peace. And this would usually be reserved for the rulers or the conquerors or the victors, even the local leaders in that time. And so she's speaking to the leaders. You who ride on white donkeys, who sit in judges' attire, and who walk along the road, far from the noise of the archers, among the watering places, there they shall recount the righteous acts of the Lord. So she's putting a kind of a stipulation and a requirement and a responsibility on these local leaders there, that they are to recount these things that the Lord has done. They are to make these things known in these areas that are away from the battle, not in the forefront, not on the battlefield. These people that may not have heard about all the great things because they're separated by miles and lots of area of space, between the battleground and where they live, or where they have their homes. Let them know about that. It's a leader's responsibility to convey that message about the Lord's goodness, about the Lord's power that He conveyed, and give them the victory. There they shall recount the righteous acts of the Lord, the righteous acts for His villagers in Israel. Then the people of the Lord shall go down to the gates. Now the gates, of course, would have been the place in those ancient times where they would have what we would today think about like the city hall, a place where the leaders of the community, the town, or the city would gather there and they'd make decisions. They'd have court and things. These would be done at the gates of the city. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake, awake, sing a song. Oh, arise, Barak, and lead your captives away, O son of Abinoam. All right. Now come on down to verse 13 and down to verse, I believe it's 18. And she's going to begin to speak about all those that come and helped them in the battle, but she's also going to make mention about those that didn't come to help. So she's going to, in a way, calling those guys out. Then the survivors, verse 13, came down, the people against the nobles. The Lord came down for me against the mighty. From Ephraim were those whose roots were in Amalek. After you, Benjamin. Now, if you notice, these are going to be the tribal names. So in this area where the tribes have their stay of land or have their territory of land, when they were going to battle, of course, the call went out to these different tribes to come and fight. So that's just what she's doing. She's making mention of these, and so you recognize these tribal names. Let me start over again. From Ephraim, those of you whose roots were in Amalek. For after you, Benjamin, with your peoples. From Machir, rulers came down. And from Zebulun, those who bear the recruiter's staff. And the prince of Issachar were with Deborah. As Issachar, so was Barak, sent into the valley under his command. Among the divisions of Reuben, there were great resolves of heart. Why did you sit among the sheepfolds to hear the pipings for the flocks? The divisions of Reuben have great searchings of heart. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan. And why did Dan remain on ships? Asher continued at the seashore and stayed by his inlets, and Zebulun is a people who jeopardized their lives to the point of death. Naphtali also on the heights of the battlefield. And so, in a way, what she's doing, she's making mention of all those that helped. Notably, Ephraim, the tribe of Manasseh that was on the western side of the Jordan River. The half tribe was on the eastern side, the other half was on the western side, so she makes mention of them. Benjamin, Zebulun, Issachar, Naphtali. And so all these tribes were helpful in the battle, but there was some that weren't. Reuben, she calls them out. East Manasseh, so eastern side of the Jordan. The tribe of Dan, she calls them out. The tribe of Asher, she calls those guys out as well. So, she doesn't pull any punches. If you helped her, then she's going to give you some attaboys, some props, if you will. If you didn't, she's going to give you a calling out. She's going to hold you accountable to that. And so I think that's a job of a leader as well, that in a time of need, they were supposed to come and help their fellow brothers, and they did not. And so she's making mention of that in this song. It is something that here we are, probably close to 4,000 years on the other side of that. And even that particular day of battle is remembered throughout posterity, throughout eternity, really, for generations and generations and generations to recall that these tribes did not show up whenever they were needed. All right, so now moving on to the battle. The battle now is going to be really kind of drawn out for us and described for us. The kings came and fought. Then the kings of Canaan fought. In Tanakh, by the waters of Megiddo. Megiddo, by the way, is this famous place where we think about Armageddon. Har is the word for a mountain, Har, and Megiddo would be in this plain area that so many battles had taken place. And so Megiddo is this area that's in that particular area that we're talking about. Again, the future battle of Armageddon will take place in this area. They took no spoils of silver. They fought from the heavens. The stars for their courses fought against Sisera. The torrent of Kishon swept them away. That ancient torrent, the torrent of Kishon. O my soul, march on in strength. Then the horses' hooves pounded, the galloping of the steeds. Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse its inhabitants bitterly, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, against the mighty. And so making mention that the battle, was coming and away from the heavens, letting us know, and she's attributing it to the help that came from the Lord, the God of heaven and earth. And that help came from the Lord, come down from heaven to that battleground where they were fighting. Of course, they got the victory. So apparently this city of Meroz, M-E-R-O-Z, apparently was not any help to them as well. But the thing that we have to remember, even though these tribes like Dan and the half-tribe of Manasseh and these others didn't come and help, this city didn't help, what God's works was still accomplished. They just missed out on being able to help and the benefits that they would have received, probably things that we don't even read about, things that kind of a cloud that hung over those tribes from that day forward because they did not show up and help their fellow brethren. There's no telling what took place during those times that they were thought of in that way by their brothers that did go out and fight. When they realized, hey, this whole tribe of Dan didn't show up. These guys were sitting there thinking about what it was like to go in battle and didn't show up. We'll never forget that. All right, come on down to verse 24. So here's this, again, lady we mentioned that was in chapter 4 previously, Jael, that when she finally was the one that slew Sisera. She's going to give her some praise in this particular song of hers. Verse 24, most blessed among women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Blessed is she among women in tents. He asked for water, she gave milk. She brought out cream in a lordly bowl. She stretched her hand to the tent peg, her right hand to the workman's hammer, and she pounded Sisera. She pierced his head. She split and struck through his temple. At her feet he sank, he fell, he lay still. At her feet he sank, he fell. Where he sank, there he fell dead. And we remember what took place in there when he come into her tent wanting water, really, really, really thirsty, and she gives him milk, probably goat's milk. And it was probably a warm milk at that, didn't have refrigeration. And, something about milk, it has a lot of different types of chemicals. One of those is tryptophan, and that's the same thing that we find in that Thanksgiving turkey that puts us to sleep, after we eat. We wonder why we're so sleepy. Milk has that, and so this guy who was fleeing from the battle, his chariot, some reason or other, if it broke down or if he just decided to abandon it and hit the road on his feet, he runs into her tent for shelter and wanting water. She gives him milk. He falls asleep, tells her, if somebody comes here, if there's a man here, tell them no. And she, as a woman in that time, the women would have predominantly been the ones responsible for keeping up the tent. In other words, putting it up, taking it down, and things like that, maintaining it. And so she would have been familiar with what it took to raise up a tent and keep it supported, and which involved a hammer and some tent pegs. And so, she saw this opportunity. Here's the enemy of God's people, and he's presented himself there. What a great opportunity to help defeat one of the enemies of God's people. And so she does it. She puts the tent peg through his temple, nails him to the ground. I told you this was kind of a gory, rated PG-13 or R-type book, and certainly we're going to see even more of these kind of things take place, especially when we get to the very end. And so she was responsible for taking the life of Sisera, this one who was opposed to Israel in this day, this lady Jael. All right, and so we come down to verse 28. The mother of Sisera looked through the window and cried out through the lattice, "Why is this chariot so long in coming? Why tarries the clatter of his chariots? How come Sisera's not coming back? How come I don't hear his chariot coming?" Her wisest ladies answered her. Yes, she answered she answered herself, "Are they not finding and dividing the spoil? To every man a girl or two. In other words, she's saying, well, the reason they're not coming back, is because they've won the victory and they've got so much of spoil from defeating the Israelites. They're just taking time to divide it. There's just so much of the victory spoil left over. That's what's making them late coming back. That, of course, was not what took place. To every man a girl or two, and of course during that time, all of the spoil went to the victors, even the people. For Sisera, plunder of dyed garments, plunder of garments embroidered and dyed, 2 pieces of dyed embroidery for the neck of the looter. All right, and so verse 31. Thus let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let those who love him be like the sun. And so we know that the sun is going to be there tomorrow, just like it was yesterday, just like it was 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago and 6,000 years ago. And it'll be that way until the Lord gives us a new heaven and a new earth. And we're going to see toward the end of the book of Revelation, we have no need of the sun because the Lord is the light there. So that's going to be a tremendous time in eternity, the eternal age that we speak about. That's not now, though. That's in the future. But let those who love him be like the sun, just be continuing on and on and on. But the enemies, may they perish, may they just dissolve, like the course of the day, like only last just a few hours. When it comes out in full strength, the sun she's speaking of, so the land had rest for 40 years. Oh, wow. So again, we see they have risen up out, as the song spoke about their oppression, everyone fearful about going out, even traveling the roads. And then they bring this great victory. Sisera and Barak and Jael, Deborah and Barak and Jael bring this great victory over Sisera and his forces. And the land is again, and the people are again at a place of rest. They defeated the enemies once again. But notice this, that the land and the people are going to have rest only for 40 years. 40 in the Bible is a number of a period of transition. And over we see that time period come up over and over again. It rained on the earth 40 days and 40 nights during the flood. Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights. Jesus rose from the grave and was on the earth before he ascended for 40 days. And so, that period is, the people wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. We saw that. And so over and over we see that as a transition period. And here they're going to be transitioning again from a time of being free and having peace and rest, 40 years. But then what's going to happen? That same kind of thing, that cycle repeats itself again. They go down from being at peace down to a place of, just kind of complacency and apathy, and then they're going to turn into idolatry and turn away from the Lord. And then they're going to be in bondage and cry out to the Lord. The Lord's going to send another judge or a deliverer out to them. All right. Well, as we close, we can think about how this song closes, is really how good it is to be on the Lord's side than it is to be on the enemy's side. And the song says that and explains that for me and you, and admonishes, the Lord to help that be the case. Let your enemies perish. Let your people, the ones that love you, be like the sun, just as bright and just as shining and lasting as that particular object in the sky, that great big ball of fire. And, if we're on the Lord's side, if we're with him, we're on the correct and the right side, the good side, the side that has the most benefits in this life and especially the life to come. And that is to be a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ. And, Jesus said, in his many teachings there, which we have in our gospel accounts there, that he that's not with me is against me. How prolific that is, how great a statement that is, that are we really with the Lord? We have to ask ourselves that. And if we are, then, man, we're on the right side. But if we're not, then we need to make that transition. We don't want to be on the opposite side of that, because that opposite side can bring nothing but defeat, sorrow, despair, and ultimately an eternity of regret. And so I hope that you are, and I believe that probably 99.99% of you are on the Lord's side, and we're on the side of victory. And so I'm grateful, guys, to be able to be with you today and to be able to share with you in this 5th chapter of the book of Judges. Excuse me. So I hope you'll continue to read on chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, and chapter 9. And Lord willing, tomorrow on Thursday, we'll come back and we'll talk about Judges chapter 10. Well, God bless you. Thanks again for joining me. Have a great day.